Boys and girls, welcome back to the channel. Glad to have you guys here. Welcome everybody. If you guys don't know who I am, of course, I am the self-proclaimed F2P god. I did F2P to T5 in 182 days. We are out here with a new video about transitioning to SOC. As you guys may know, as you can tell by the, where is it, right there? The little coaching thing I have. I've been doing a lot of coaching lately. Now, of all the clients that I've coached, I get a few similar questions and I get a pretty good idea of the people who are in the biggest need of help. And those people are generally people who are transitioning to Season of Conquest. Now, granted, most people that buy my coaching are not F2P. They're mostly whales, but I am F2P and I transitioned. And I did, I think, 522 million KP on my first season of Conquest KvK. If you guys were there, you already know what's up. I've got a pretty good leg to stand on when I can tell you how to play as an F2P and just how to play as a player when you transition. The most important thing that we're gonna have to do here is we're gonna have to get rid of, number one, some bad habits. There are some commanders from pre-season of Conquest that are just not going to be useful as soon as you transition. Like, not at all, not even kind of. And people are just so desperate to hold on to their Charles Martels, their Richards, their Alexes. They are so desperate to make these commanders work. They're not terrible necessarily, but in your first season of Conquest, your transition in, you have to have a different mind about things because you don't have all the armaments, you don't have all the resources, you don't have all the speeds that all these older players go into. So for example, my first season of Conquest, we're in 2500. We're against Kingdom 1069. They were huge. They were great fighters, and they put a lot of pedal to the metal, let's say. And we struggled greatly with that. I struggled for sure, right? And I've got good gear. I've got the commanders I was looking for, but I don't have the resource reserves. I don't have the speed up reserves. I don't have the just natural VIP. For you guys that are just starting, all of us older kingdoms are going to have many more armaments than younger kingdoms coming out. The later this video is, the more rough the transition is going to be for you guys. So now let's start. How did I go into one of the oldest kingdoms in the game as one of the newest kingdoms in the game and come out very hot? 522 mil KP, which was the equivalent of 30 million Crusader kills, which is the max achievements you can get. And I did about 1.3 million T5 deads, F2P. If you are running marches, if you're coming to Season of Conquest, you should probably be running one march. The average player will probably be able to get one expertise commander before the start of Season of Conquest. That commander should be YSG. So you should have Sun Tzu, YSG, by the time you get to Season of Conquest. Now, how many marches you run is completely determined on how much gear you have. In terms of the commanders, you can invest in some commanders and still have them work. Your gear is like the end-all be-all of everything, and now with armaments coming out, your armaments are probably also going to play a large factor. I think armaments are probably going to play less of a factor since honestly, you know, if you get lucky with a few armaments, even if you have to run Echelon instead of Wedge, or if you have to run, is it triple line for the movement speed, triple line instead of Wedge, or something like that, like the Wedge, Hollow Square, Echelon, you know, these are all micro optimizations, like the 5% skill damage. It's the actual stats within them, right? If you're getting like plus 20% stats from your armaments, it doesn't matter if it's going to be Wedge or Hollow Square, you're going to be getting 20% stats, and that's really what's important. But gear, on the other hand, is much more linear. Armaments, you'll eventually get some hits, and you'll eventually be okay. Inscriptions are going to play kind of an issue later, but obviously, you know, all of that is very new on the creation of this video, so there will probably be a armament and inscription video that I'll make later on. But minimum gear requirements. So the first thing we're going to go through is what I suggest to my clients, what they should have for the absolute bare minimum for running a march in the open field. If you are running archers, you can run every single piece of archer gear there is, purple, except for the chest. For the chest, you'd want either Milky Way or Dragon's Breath. Personally, I'm a big proponent of running Dragon's Breath. However, I also have a Milky Way. I think for a meta 5 march or 6 march right now, you're running at least 2 archer marches. So if you plan on running 1 infantry march, 2 cavalry marches, and 1 archer march as like a general 4 march with the commanders we'll go in later, getting a extra archer march on top of that as your 5th, you might not want to run 6 total set pieces, right? So if you, for some reason, pulled a Milky Way out of the tavern, it may not be a bad idea to just run full epics and a Milky Way, right? At the same time, you can also run the Dragon's Breath, so you have an easier transition, right? You'd be able to translate this Dragon's Breath plate into a 6-piece archer set, and I think that's really strong. The thing is like, how long will you be playing the game? How active are you chaining? And how many gear events do you do to the point where you'll have all of these blueprints? I think if you're just transitioning, just getting the Dragon's Plate if you want to transition the Archer Marches more later, or just getting the Milky Way if you pulled one out of a tavern and you don't want to transition later, I think are both fine. If you have the option between something to buy in the store, I'd be buying the Dragon's Breath. But if you pull the Milky Way for free, it's also a fine choice. I'm probably going to be doing the Milky Way because I pulled it for free. I have other gear pieces that I'm looking for. In terms of cavalry, the main swap that you need to be doing for cavalry is right here. Boots of the Hellish Wasteland. You're going to be translating this 5.5 cavalry attack to 7.5% cavalry health. This is a huge swap. So that's one piece, right? You're going to get set boots. And the next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to translate this Dark Lord's Blessing into a heavy armor of the Hellish Wasteland. These are both really good swaps, right? And it will give you 2-piece cavalry set, which is going to give you an extra 3% troop health. So you're swapping 2 stats for defense and attack, both to health, and you're getting a plus 3% overall. The next thing you're going to be looking for is you're going to look to replace the Abyssal Visage, right? So if you have this right now, personally, I prefer running an Expeditions Warhelm Special Talented for cavalry. That's what I've got on my Joan right now. However, when I enter KvK again, the KvK Helm prior to the con is really good. It's a good swap, and your meta cavalry marches aren't going to be using 4 or 6-piece Hellish Wasteland set, right? You're going to be using Ash of the Dawn, Navarre's Control, set chest, set boots, KvK weapon, and KvK helm, right? The KvK weapon is not very important. Later on, if you're min-maxing, it's not bad, but Special Talented Heart of the Saint is like fine, right? You're not really too concerned about that. But the Abyssal Visage is ass, and you really don't want to be walking around with, I want to say 8% or 8.5% defense on Expedition Warhelm. You can just get Pride of the Con. It's very expensive, but it doesn't matter if you're Special Talented or not. And then when you Iconic it, your plus 3 is really good. Overall, this is a super solid piece. I would prefer this over the Warhelm of the Hellish Wasteland. This is still okay. It's not bad. But if you're translating into Season of Conquest, right, you could just run your Expedition Warhelm for your first KvK, and then, you know, like 2 KvKs later, when you have the coins to get a couple Pride of the Cons, you can. Now, if we find out the inscriptions for armaments are absolutely crucial to be getting in the Season of Conquest shops, and you can't afford the Conquest coins on this, you can always go for Warhelm of the Hellish Wasteland and the set weapon and run 4-piece set. Personally, I'm not going to do that. I'm not a huge fan. I don't want to be pressured into running 4-piece set when I prefer to just have Heart of the Saint. But I understand why some people would do it. I just don't see the 3% counterattack damage is very good. And swapping my weapon from defense to attack is just, you know, it's not very exciting for me. Even running this without the 4-piece, if you by no means can ever get Pride of the Con, it's still okay. It's better than Abyssal Visage, but, you know, plus 3% cav defense and a plus 3 iconic instead of like the, you know, so plus 8 versus plus 11 with the base stat plus 3. It's not a huge jump. But what is a huge jump is Pride of the Con. I would suggest Pride of the Con, cavalry set chest, and cavalry set boots. For infantry, I have a higher burden for because infantry right now is really slow, and I don't want to say it's not the weakest, right? Guan Scipio is an incredibly strong march. And maybe like Scipio Sargon, Scipio Tarek. I think both of these marches are fine. And if you want to run 2 infantry, you probably can get away with it. The issue is infantry are slow. They're super duper slow right now. And if you're ever going to be running these marches on the field, you're going to need to buff it up. It's not just a matter of stats. It's also a matter of movement speed. And you can't find yourself running windswept on the field right now. So something I'd be looking for, me personally, I would look for set shield, set helmet, set gloves, and infantry set boots, right? These 4 things are going to give you movement speed. Now, you're only going to need 1 infantry march, and that's going to be Guan Scipio. Now, you can progress later on if you want, but if you want something that's going to be able to keep up with your other marches, your archers and your cav, you're going to need something fast. You don't really have to focus on march speed for your other marches because they're already fast, but infantry being the slowest, especially if you're running T5 or some mix of T5, they're going to need this movement speed. And with the amount of cavalry in the open field right now, with the meta being Joan Nevsky, XY William, Boudica YSG, Boudica Artemisia, Henry, Tommy, right? Like all these marches are very fast. You need this movement speed very badly. On top of that, I would then go for a Hope Cloak, and I'd probably call that good. There are more improvements you can do after that, but bare minimum, like what I would field is I would field 4-piece infantry set with the helm, weapon, boots and gloves, and a Hope Cloak. With that, you should be good. That's a lot of legendary gear, but again, like your infantry march has to be able to catch up with your other marches and has to be able to run away with your other marches as well. Just running 1 march, you also want that movement speed. It's very hard to like run this as slow as it is. My talent tree is almost exclusively focused on movement speed, and I can just barely with my retreat key outrun people chasing me down in the open field that are cavalry. Just barely. And I have all the advantages. Everything is stacked in my favor, and I can just barely do it. Again, the absolute bare minimum if you're going to run anything for infantry might be infantry set helm, set boots, and Hope Cloak, right? But realistically, if you're going to be running a infantry march on the field, you're gonna want to have the 4-piece infantry set. Again, it's super expensive. It's one of the reasons why I don't suggest infantry once you get to Season of Conquest. I suggest infantry pre-SOC, right? But if you have all this legendary equipment built for infantry, you're probably not that far away. It's probably just a couple extra pieces in order to optimally field infantry on the field. Again, archers are probably the easiest to build. If you pulled a Milky Way from a chest, you build a Milky Way and full epics, you're good to go. And cavalry, you know, having a blue helm and having cavalry set boots and set chest, that's also not very expensive. So like the other troop types are a little stronger than infantry, but again, if you ran infantry pre-SOC and you already have some of these items, then it's not that bad running it. Once you get to Season of Conquest, different people have different KD requirements. They have different stats they look to get every KvK. Me personally, I want to be able to do my 30 million Crusader kills, and I want to do 1 to 2 million T5 deads every KvK. Keep in mind, killing a T5 is much more important than killing a T4, and you've gotten all the value you can out of the unit. So when you train a T4, the T4 itself is valuable to fight in the open field, but in terms of the power they give you, each T4 unit will only give you 4 power, right? So if you're looking to win events, you want to upgrade your tier 4 into tier 5. Then you get the value, you get some kind of gold heads, you get some kind of gems, right, for winning these events, and then you kill all of your T5. At the end of every KvK, they'll give you 50% of your units back, so it doesn't matter how many you kill. Right now, I'm 82 million power. This is way, 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 way too big for me. So I want to kill probably at least 2 mil to 2.3 mil T5 by the next KvK. I register in about 10 days. We have about 6 days of pre-KvK, and I have about another 7 days until combat. From now until then, I'm going to start killing probably around 2.3 mil of my T5. The reason why is because I don't need all of these T5. I don't want to be killing my T4, but Kingdoms will look at your T5 deads as a much higher investment than your T4, and it's good for your account because you don't give a shit about the T5. You can get half back anyway, and it's not like T5 are filling the majority of your field marches. Now, when I talk about fielding different marches, people often ask me, do I field T5 or T4? I've seen some people field all T4 and they do really, really well. The way I like to think of the ratio in which I field troops is I field it at the ratio I want to pull back. So if you want to pull back when your troops are orange bar or slightly before, let's say 70%, you'd run 30% T4 and 70% T5. So when that ratio dies out, you pull your T5 back. You have the hitting power of T5, but your T4 die first. If you want to pull back at 50%, then you should run half and half. And if you are just going to YOLO all your marches until they die repeatedly, I don't suggest this for anybody, but if you're going to do that, maybe you want to run all T4. There are some people that do that, but generally those are more established players that have, you know, a lot of resources and a lot of speeds and not a lot of time. So just be aware of what you're doing and the percentages in which you're fielding troops. So if you're doing what I did, and you're fielding maybe 30% T4 or 70% T5, and you're fighting very efficiently, let's do some calculations. If you wanted to, under the best of circumstances, you wanted to heal a total of 15 million infantry throughout your entire KvK with a 75% healing bonus, so we're talking about 30% for your circle, 30% for your kingdom buff, and a 15% rune. Put that to 95% because you guys are running France because you're all smart cookies. This is assuming you don't have VIP 15 yet. If you wanted to heal 15 million T4 infantry and 15 million T5 infantry. For the T4, it would cost you about 200 days of speed ups and roughly 4 bill aggregate resources. When I use aggregate resources in this context, I'm talking about a food value. So stone, wood, and food would be 1, and gold would be 2. It would cost you 1.8 bill food, 1.8 bill wood, and 120 million gold. So roughly about 4 billion resources. Then for the T5 that would be hospitalized, it would cost you about 4.8 billion food, 4.8 billion wood, and 2.4 billion gold. These are huge costs. Now, of course, this is a 15 mil T5 and a 15 mil T4, assuming that you get one-to-one trades with everything. More realistically, I assume that if you're fighting about as smart as you can, you're running only expertise or the highest tier units that you'll have available in terms of commanders and gear, and you're fighting as smart as you can. Let's say that you're going to be doing half of these stats, right? So for the T4, we'd be looking for 900 mil food, 900 mil wood, and 60 mil gold for 750,000 hospitalized infantry, right? And about 100 days of speed ups. For T5, we'd be looking at, for the same amount of troops, we're looking at 2.4 billion food, 2.4 billion wood, and 1.2 billion gold. These are under the most optimal circumstances healing speed wise. So, you know, as a learning learning experience here, even if you're fighting pretty optimally, and for your kills, every single report you get, literally ever, is a 1 to 2. Right? Not 1 to 2 in terms of power taken, 1 to 2 in terms of severely wounded units. Even if you can do that, right, you're still looking at 220 days of healing speeds and billions and billions and billions and billions of resources spent. It is very, very, very expensive. And remember, if we're being efficient here, if you're taking inefficient trades by running worse marches than this, you could be getting less than 1-to-1 trades. If you're doing that, you're never ever going to hit 30 mil C kills. I look for 30 mil. That's my benchmark. Not a lot of people do that. If you're looking for 15 mil, you might want to half what I typed in. And the rock healing calculator, if you're wondering how much you're going to have to spend, I'll put in the description below. So make sure to check that out if you want to check your own numbers on it. These would be the minimum requirements to get some good kills and good deaths. So, unless you fight as efficiently as I do, which I will be having like a hotkey guide coming out and talk a little bit more about it, you're going to be spending a ton of resources. Make sure that you have farms. Some people may notice that pre-season of Conquest, especially if you were a smarter player, you did not need that many farms, right? But now that your account is finished growing, all of these resources and all of these speeds, now that you're T5, are probably going to go to the open field. If they're going to go to the open field, you want to make sure that you have at least 3 farms, potentially 5 to 7, if you want to be fielding this many kills every KvK. When I give you guys advice, I don't give you advice as casual players, right? When I talk about getting 30 million Crusader kills, and when I talk about killing 1.5 or 1 million T5s, like I know that I'm talking to the upper echelon, the hardcore players. If you're a hardcore player, you're gonna need at least 5 farms. You better buckle up and just, get it over with. The later you wait, the worse it's gonna be, and the more difficult bottleneck is gonna be for resources. With the logistics being done, we're gonna get to the fun part, the commanders, right? What people are gonna be looking for their ideal 5 march. Now, if you guys have seen my commanders, if you guys have been on stream, I stream basically every day. You guys may notice I don't actually have an ideal 5 march. Right now, I'm working on Nevsky for my Nevsky Joan after I finish my Guan Sip. So my Joan is done, then my Nevsky is getting worked on, and then after Nevsky is going to come Boudica. Because the big 3 that you're looking for on the open field are going to be Nevsky Joan, Guan Scipio, and Boudica YSG. These marches complement each other and protect each other. In a world where Nevsky Joan is launching a bunch of skills off, you want to have a Guan Scipio to silence them, to be able to run away. In a world where Nevsky Joan is doing all this damage, you want somebody to debuff your target so that they take more damage. That's where Boudica would come in. Boudica, unlike Nevsky Joan, also will not get silenced by the Guan Scipio, right? So you have all these counters out right now, and you really just want all of these, let's say, mythic tier commanders, the really, really OP ones that have just come out. This may change over time, right? If you guys are watching a year from now, you may think, oh, Joan of Arc? Wow, she sucks, dude, right? And that may be the case. But as of right now, these mythic tier commanders are some of the best you have in the open field. So these should be the first 3 that you go for. For an ideal 5 march, what I would like to see, as of this being recorded, I would like to have a Guan Sip, which is my current first march, is what I've got right now. So Guan Yu, Scipio, with the aforementioned gear we talked before. You generally don't want to field a march without at least the minimum gear requirements, as we talked about in the minimum gear requirements section. The next march I would make, I made Nevsky Joan. I regret that a little bit. I think making Boudica YSG, especially if your only commander that you're coming into Season of Conquest with expertise is YSG, I think Boudica's a fine choice. I think the gear requirements for her are really, really low. All you have to do is get Boudica to 555-1, and then she will complement your Guan Scipio very well. And you'll just run your Boudica YSG. That's assuming you have YSG done. If you don't have YSG done, then I would go with Nevsky Joan. But if you do have YSG done, I would consider Boudica instead. So we got Guan Yu, Scipio, we got Boudica YSG, we have Nevsky and Joan, and then we're gonna have commanders that obviously I still don't have, but I would plan to get in the future depending on how commander releases look like. Those commanders would be XY and William. I think they're a really, really good combo, and they release good buffs to your allies while simultaneously doing a shitload of damage. And the final pairing I would have for my 5 march would be Henry and Tomurus. I was not a big proponent of this guy, but apparently he's awesome. He's not awesome because he does anything unique. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He just does what other people do, except better. 2,300 damage direct factor, has the support tree, has the conquering tree, right? This is like, gives me almost like Saladin vibes, except way, way, way stronger, like super steroided. So he's going to take less skill damage. He's going to deal a ton, right? He's got great stats here. We're looking at 20% attack, defense, and march speed. And we're looking over here at, some light buffs, but I mean, it's all like pretty good. If you had him at 5.5/1 or 5.5/1.5 or just expertise, I think he's an awesome pairing with Tommy. Tommy's a great, great debuffer. Something that we're finding in the open field right now is apparently when people are trying to field Sargon, they're having issues trying to get all of their debuffs on. Tommy is really, really capable at launching as many debuffs as humanly possible in a very, very short amount of time. I think she is still pretty good, and you don't have to go too far with her. The only thing that's really important is that her last skill is at 5. Personally, I also like getting the 3rd skill to 5, but Either one is fine. Just having her as a final debuffer is pretty good. Also, investing in archers is once again very, very cheap. All it takes is one set chest or one Milky Way to really make them fieldable. And of course, they don't generally require full investment. So those would be my 5 marches. I would have 2 archers, 2 cavalry, and 1 infantry. Infantry is pretty weak right now, even with the release of Sargon and Tarek. And I'd be very, very careful looking at these commanders and investing them, especially as you come straight into Season of Conquest. If you want to invest in commanders, Guan and Scipio are fine, Boudica is fine, and Joan and Nevsky are fine. I would look at those as your first 3, and then XY William and Henry Tommy as your next 2. Honorable mentions here will be Chandra. He's a very good debuffer. You'll see some of the larger players end up running marches like Chandra William very far into the late game. I think he's pretty good. Having health reduction not on your primary ability is quite unique and very strong. He is also really good because if you guys are getting access to any kind of Mightiest Governors, like during KvKs while you guys are fighting, as of right now, the only cavalry on the Mightiest Governor event that I can think of outside of Chandra is probably Attila, and Attila is no longer in the meta. Sometimes he's in rallies, but generally he's just ostracized. If you're using Attila Takeda, you're generally looked down upon. So Chandra is something that you can get out of the MGEs, and he will be subsidized because of that, and I like him a lot. Because of that. Me personally, unless I got access to a couple cavalry MGEs, I probably wouldn't run him. But if you're looking for one to run on the open field, specifically a fielder, Chandra's not a bad idea. Another honorable mention will be Sargon. I haven't even unlocked him. I think he's good. He's not bad, necessarily. I just don't exactly like where he fits in the meta. He has something that I call CJ syndrome. You guys don't know who CJ is. He's Chuck. You guys will not see him very often on the open field. He's not necessarily a bad commander. He just is a heavy nuker that requires that he fights for a very extended period of time. So if we were to look at Chiak, he has to fight for like at least 32 seconds before he's getting like his full power off. And again, it's not bad, you know, there's some situations where you're fighting for a very long period of time, but right now in the open field, people like dropping a couple abilities and they like running away. We just had this huge conversation about how a 4-piece infantry set is basically required just so you can stick to targets and run away in optimal situations. It's very hard to want to run a commander like this and just hope for the best. Sargon has many of the same issues comes to running his odd stacks. His odd stacks are good. It's just a matter of stacking enough of them to where you get a lot of value off of him, and simultaneously not just because, I mean, you get to 10 odd stacks, you're doing 30% extra damage, and then he eats them all to only do 1,000 damage factor. So some people have been talking about doing a 5-5-5-0 Sargon to perhaps get value off of that. I don't know. I think it's a little too gimmicky for my taste when Tommy's going to do kind of like what I'm looking for, and I get to run her with an archer march instead of an infantry march. Another guy that I like a ton that's going to be an honorable mention is going to be Tarek. In terms of commanders that I would look off the infantry MGE, I've got a lot of honorable mentions here that are MGE related for context, because MGEs are generally not good for the field, but there have been a couple specifically that can be fit in for the field. I think Tarek is a great nuker. If Chiak fights for 32 seconds, he's at his best. If Tarek fights immediately, he's already at his best. He's a huge nuker, and when paired behind Scipio, I think he's really strong. Me personally, I was very, very tempted to work this in. Obviously, he's got 2200 direct damage factor plus potential 900 extra. And if he's expertise, you know, you're looking at a potential 3400 direct damage factor, right? If you're pairing him with Scipio, you've got 40% infantry attack here, 40% infantry attack there, 10% infantry damage here. You got march speed, which is again very important. Third skill isn't very important because it's a rally skill. And then you have another 15% damage bonus here and a nice rage reduction. This commander is really, really, really nice. And if I were to run a 2 infantry march, which I generally wouldn't, I would either be running Guan Alex with Scipio Tarek, or I'd be running something like Guan Scipio Sargon Alex. Would probably be like my second infantry march in there. Personally, I don't think a second infantry is very good, but if I were to run 1 extra infantry march, I would probably stick Alex on my Guan and Scipio with my Tarek. But this would basically only be the case if I could get a couple MGEs that would make this guy cheaper. Another honorable mention is going to be Honda. Honda is a pretty good commander. As of right now, I'm a little afraid he's going to get phased out as we look at the potential leadership commanders to come, or just commanders in general. I think Honda does okay damage. He's got a large AoE, but he's only doing 1250 damage factor. Especially if you're going to be running Honda, you almost always run him behind XY. There are some other Honda pairings such as like Scipio Honda, but I don't want to run multiple infantry marches. And if I do, I already have Tarek, and I like Tarek for infantry better than Honda. So if I'm going to be running infantry, it's going to be Scipio Tarek. I could see him being used behind XY, but I don't know of a good archer pairing that would include Honda. So XY Honda is basically what you'd be looking for if you ran him. I don't like the lower damage factor. I think his stats are pretty good in terms of getting like extra march speed, extra attack, the attack bonuses. His expertise is really nice. Yeah, his fourth skill is just not going to be active because you're not fielding multiple unit types, but that's okay. Honda is just overall, he's a pretty good duelist and he does a lot of damage. He's on here because when you spin the leadership wheel, you don't have a lot of people to spin for. If you're a higher spender, you're doing more than 10 spins, and you're 100 spinning every wheel, you just won't have anybody else to spin for. So Honda's not a bad choice. I just think he's going to get phased out soon, so I'm not putting him in my optimal marches. Another one that I would suggest would be Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I think Nebuchadnezzar has been largely replaced by Henry because you'd be running Nebuchadnezzar Tommy Risk, but now you'd be running Henry Tommy. And Henry just does what I want out of Nebu a little better than Nebu does it. Nebuchadnezzar is a pretty good commander. He's just good. He's just a stat stick. He doesn't do anything particularly special. He's got like a nice little rage debuff, and you'd be looking to get him to like a 5-5-1-5. And this is something you'd get from Archer MGEs. But if you're getting Archer MGEs, I'd already prefer Henry or even Tommy. I think Nebuchadnezzar's good. I just think he's a little old at this point. And then the final one is Cyrus. If you chain, you may already be using him. His third skill has the same area of effect as a YSG active. So it's a very long range. He's good for chaining for that. But in terms of combat, I mean, he's just got like good debuffs and, you know, he does like okay damage. It's nothing too over the top. He's been largely phased out by Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar's been phased out by Henry. So if you've got the wheel, you're probably already looking at Boudica. You probably shouldn't think about it too hard, but I figured I'd put him here as an honorable mention because for my previous 5 marches, I would have him at the bottom, maybe with YSG or something like that. And the last guy on this list, there's a lot of honorable mentions because there's a lot of good commanders, is going to be Trajan. I don't think Trajan is bad necessarily. I just think he's a little slow and he is a magnet to get hit on the open field. If you're going to run more than 5 marches, potentially 6 or 7, then maybe Trajan would have a place in there. I think he's a fine commander. I just don't think I'd have him in my 5 march. I think he's too much of a liability, and we're in a meta where infantry is already slow, and if Trajan is running, I guess you could run him with mostly cav, but you're running him with all 3 unit types. And if you're running him with all 3 unit types, he's very slow. And you also don't want to invest a bunch of equipment with leadership special talents and then trying to decide like which is going to give you the best. It's just very questionable to do so. And I think if you're a very, very large whale, you could always consider Trajan. But if you're an average player and you're looking to do well in the open field, I would definitely not prioritize this man. He's on the honorable mentions list because he's good, he's just not great. So now I have just told you guys a absolute metric shitload of commanders. So we're going to go over the minimum investments, what you need to run at the absolute base in order to make these guys good. So Guan Yu, he can be a 5-1-1-1 and have about 60% of his overall power. Or he could be 5-1-5-5 and have about 90-95% of his total power. You should not expertise Guan Yu if you can help it, and if you have skill resets, they should generally all go into Guan Yu to try and get him to the ideal 5-1-5-5. Scipio should be expertised. Some people try to run him as a 5-5-1-1, some people try to run him as a 5-5-1. The issue is all of Scipio's skills are absolutely magnificent, and there is no possible reason to not expertise him. He is that good. There's just no reason. Taking skill damage and reducing it by 30% is awesome. When the target is silenced, growing your rage better, you pair him with Guan is great. If you're going to skimp on either Scipio or Guan, I'd rather skimp on Guan than Scipio. Next is going to be Boudica. Boudica does not have to be expertise. She's an absolutely epic commander. Even at 5-5-1-1, I guess epic has a different connotation here, but even at 5-5-1-1, she is really, really strong. Her stats are awesome. Her debuff is awesome. And when placed in tandem with other commanders, she's awesome. Having the extra damage bonuses as a 5-5-1 is also good, and her 4th skill here isn't super good. Her expertise is okay, but not great. So having her at 5-5-5-1 is completely acceptable if you want to field her. I would say she's probably at like 85 to 90% of her total power at that point, depending on the matchup you're in. Control effects, such as Silence, Disarm, and Heal Immune. Silence is really, really, really popular in the open field right now because everybody is running Guan Scip. So getting her expertise is pretty important, but if you're fighting a Guan Scipio with Boudica, they're generally going to run away. If they try to fight you, I guess you would want this expertise. It's just most people aren't going to try to do that with their Guan Scip. You are squishy though, so just pay attention. YSG at the end of the Boudica YSG should be expertised. If you're coming to Season of Conquest, this should be the only commander that I expect you to have expertise by the time you get here. If you have Alex done, or if you have a Saladin 5-5-1, that's great. You're probably not going to use them in your ideal 5 march. I have Alex expertise, and he's been on my bench collecting dust since I finished pre-soc. I don't regret investing in him, but I will have to see what we're looking for when we get to the Museum buffs, number 1, and if I ever decide to field Sargon or Tarek, then maybe he comes off the bench. YSG, however, will probably never come off the bench, and with Boudica YSG is a great pairing. YSG has to be expertise though. Nevsky for the Nevsky Joan March. Nevsky is overpowered. He's one of the strongest commanders ever released, and it's not even close. Each one of his abilities are absolutely awesome, and his expertise is great too. Some people will run Nevsky at a 5-5-1-1, some people will do it at a 5-5-5-1. You can probably do both of these. Nevsky just is that strong, and if you field him with Joan of Arc, you're gonna have it pay dividends. It just is that good. You should expertise him, but he's very strong. It's very similar to a Scipio situation where the commander is so ridiculously over the top that if you run him at a 5-5-5-1 or a 5-5-1-1, you just shouldn't. You should expertise him. I think it's a good idea and something you should strive for. Also, Nevsky, Joan, these cavalry marches get very focused. The more you skimp out on them, they are one of your biggest hospital costs when you're fighting in the field. Joan of Arc, probably the strongest commander ever released, full stop. I don't think anybody has ever been close to her, except maybe when Attila, Takeda, proportional to other kingdoms on release, was probably the most broken thing to ever hit the field. In terms of just overall power creep, this is the strongest commander. For Genghis Khan, for context, you have to expertise him to get a 30% chance to activate his single target 1700 damage. She has an area of effect 2000 damage factor for 3 people with a damage bonus and rage restoration for your allies. And she can do that 100% of the time. It just has a trigger cooldown once every 10 seconds. Basically, every other ability rotation, you'll get an extra ability. This is overwhelmingly, obscenely broken, and just with these 2 abilities alone, you're fine to field her. For Joan of Arc, if you can bring her to 5-1-1-5, I think you should do it. However, I personally like mine at 5-5-1-5, and way later, I will expertise her. At 5-5-1-5, I think she is the vast majority of what she needs to be able to field and the vast majority of what you need to do well on the field. 5-5-2-5 is also fine. It's not like any of her skills are particularly bad. It's just nothing is anywhere near as broken as her 1st and 4th skills. And her expertise is equal to about a Ring of Doom. So again, they're micro optimizations and they should probably happen later. I wouldn't use a ton of ability resets on this because again, if you have a 5-5-3-5 or a 5-5-2-5 Joan or even an expertise Joan, you're not really crying about it. On the other hand, Guan Yu really wants to be 5-1-5-5. That second skill isn't very good and his expertise isn't very good. He is like all of his power at 5-5-1-5 and he's half the price or less than half the price that expertise would cost. You'll eventually want to expertise Joan. The next one is going to be XY, right? So these are outside of our big 3 marches and now we're going to be looking at our lower 2 to finish off our 5 march. XY's 3rd skill is only a rally skill. Not super important. 5-5-1-5, generally when you see commanders with rally skills as their 3rds, 5-5-1-5 is what you're looking for. Again, if you get him to like 5-5-2-5 or you have to expertise him, you're not really crying about it. His expertise isn't bad. It's just not great, right? It looks again to be similar to like a Ring of Doom or something near that. It's not bad. It's just if you consider like you having to fill out all of your marches, a 5-5-1-5 XY is fine. So next is going to be William. William is a 5-5-5-1 slam dunk. Getting slight extra buffs is fine, and then Scourge of the North, like getting an extra 10% defense straight up and an extra 10% defense for your allies, and it's good, but this doesn't affect his rage at all. So I mean, they're not great, right? They're fine, right? Like after you've finished everything else, or if you're buying William out of dailies, I think it's totally fine to do it. But I mean, would you rather get William out of dailies or Tommy out of dailies to make sure that she's your 5th march? I think I know what I would do personally. I think William's good, but I don't think he's that good as an expertise compared to a 5-5-5-1. But I think eventually there's nothing wrong with expertising these commanders. It's just like you want to field all 5 of them with minimum gear, so your time requirement isn't too bad. Next is going to be Henry. Henry, I think, is fine as an expertise, but as a 5-5-1-5 or a 5-5-1-1, they're both fine. Really, you just need to make sure that you got his 1st skill with the skill damage taken reduction, so he can be tanky for Tommy Riss and be doing his max damage, and you want to make sure he's got his stats. He is a stat stick. You want his stats. Not really rocket science. If you get a 1st place Archer MGE, 5-5-1-1, boom, straight on the field with a +10 sculptures, and he's pretty much good to go with Tommy. Again, he's not the best commander ever, but he kind of does what he has to, and that's keep Tommy safe. He's got nice trees, kind of just does everything you want. Once you expertise him, I think his expertise is pretty good, but again, he doesn't have to really be doing all the damage. He's just there to protect Tommy and make sure she doesn't get targeted. And the last one here is going to be Tommy Riss. Tommy's a really weird commander. With every other commander in the game, you generally want to make sure that their 1st skill or their first 2 skills are maxed before you do anything with them. Tommy's 1st skill, I've maxed it here because I was doing an achievement for All Out Rumble. However, her last skill is the most important one. If you get this last skill to 5, you're good to go. If you can get this secondary skill to 5, that's also pretty good. So a 1-1-1-5 Tommy or a 1-1-5-5 Tommy are both awesome. If you want to expertise her, you can expertise her, especially because a lot of people do Tommy in dailies and they just end up maxing her like that. Just make sure that you get to her last 2 abilities. That's at the end of the day, that's really what's important. And if you keep this in mind, every single time she does a normal attack, your target is going to take an extra 3% skill damage. Henry has a lot of movement speed, and really you're just getting the exact same bonuses that Sargon's getting, except you're doing it faster, more consistently, and you get to do it on archers for a cheaper investment. And you get to buy it in dailies. So there's a lot of bonuses here. That's why I like her instead of Sargon, but they're both fine commanders. So for the honorable mentions, we'll have Chandra first. I think Chandra can be a 5-1-5-5 and it'll be fine. His second skill is a city or stronghold thing, and his expertise is good. It's just not that crazy. Generally, when you're running Chandra William. And this is gonna be like a 6th or 7th march, and you're gonna be putting XY with Honda and Chandra with William. And this is something that larger spenders or older players will do to expand their bench, or get use of getting cavalry MGEs while being a field player. Chandra's second skill isn't that bad. His expertise is okay, but not crazy. Making sure he's a 5-1-5-5 is pretty good. Basically, really want this health reduction. Health reduction is pretty rare in terms of commanders, and if it is a passive skill like his is, it will stack with active skills like Scipio's. So Scipio will debuff you by 30% health, and then Dagger, the gear piece, will debuff you by 15%, and then Chandra will debuff you by another 15%, and you'll be in a really good position. You'll be doing a ton of damage to people, and it's very valuable. Getting to 5-1-5-5, pretty good. Expertise in him is obviously fine, but yeah. Sargon is kind of a weird one. Sargon is kind of like a lost child right now, because people are trying to figure out ways to get value with him. His 4th skill takes all of his stacks away. So people have been theorizing that perhaps he would go a 5-5-5-0 with Sargon in order to have him never eat his stats. The issue is like all of the commanders we've talked about have an absolute ton of damage, so you're just melting every march available to you. So if you are running Sargon, perhaps a 5-5-5-1 would be better than expertise, but his expertise is really good. So you have the 5-5-5-0 to try and not eat your stacks, but the expertise is really good because you're trying to get more stacks and more people. It's a really weird position to be in with a commander. I've heard the 5-5-5-0. I figured I'd put it in just in case, that's relevant to you guys. Tarek, I like better than Sargon out of this infantry release. And for him, bringing him to 5-5-1-5, I think is fine. Buffing his last skill by 300. I don't think there's a huge bonus to that. You're generally not getting hit by 3 people unless you're cheeseburgering with him. If you are cheeseburgering, I think you'd want to expertise him. But if you're not, a 5-5-1-5 just seems fine on him. You don't really have to go over the top. It's just a matter of like, there's a lot of commanders that want to be like 5-5-1-5 or 5-1-1-5 or 1-1-5-5. It's just like, where are you putting your skill resets and how should you use them so you save the most sculptures? For Honda, you're going to want to expertise him. Honda's expertise is just awesome. He's such a good commander. I just think he's going to get phased out, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not investing in him. But Honda's whole, taking 57 hits is just absolutely crazy. It's so very strong. Expertise him. For sure. Nebuchadnezzar, I would bring to a 5-5-1-5. And the reason why I would do that is because third skill isn't very important because it is a leading of a rally attack. Weirdly enough, his march speed reduction only works when he leads a rally attack. So this skill is like actually completely useless, and it's very sad. His expertise is okay, but it's only like, it's 500 damage flat single target, and it's okay. It's just not great. So 5-5-1-5 for Nebu is kind of where you want to be. Again, this is just like a good way to get value out of your MGEs if you're already good to go with Henry. And then with Cyrus and Trajan, Cyrus, if you're going to use him, he needs to be expertise. I wouldn't really suggest him too much, but I see why people would want to use him. The 20% additional damage taken increase would stack with a lot of other commanders. You just got to be careful, because if you have like 2 health debuffs on actives or 2 damage taken increases on actives or skill damage taken increases on actives, you just got to be careful to not override your own buffs. And then finally, if you ever want to run Trajan, I would expertise him. I think his expertise is pretty good. Again, I don't really like running Trajan in a 5 march. I think as a 7 march, if you want to run him, you should probably expertise him. With that being said, guys, that would be the gear, the resources, the commanders, the logistics, everything you could possibly need to know. If you guys are ever interested in getting a professional look at your account, I do private coaching. It's $35 a session as of right now. The more it gets popular, the more I do raise it. So if you guys are interested in this kind of thing, you should probably do it quickly, because eventually it probably will be 50. But yeah, this is just one of the things that I generally do when I am looking over people's accounts. I'll look at their accounts, I'll take in all the context, I'll give you guys suggestions on what to invest in and why. And yeah, this is just one of the bigger overarching narratives that people generally have issues with, is the transition to Season of Conquest. So if you guys enjoy the content, make sure to like, follow, consider subscribing if you guys are interested in that. If you guys want to get notifications when I go live, or you want to contact me on offline, you can always hit me up in the Discord in the description below. And if you guys are interested in coaching, obviously you DM me on Discord. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful day, and thank you so much for watching.